Black Grandpa kicked out of park by cop. What happens next shocks everyone. The morning sun stretched long across Marlow Park, painting golden streaks over the dew-soaked grass. Children's laughter rang from the distant playground. A soft hum of joggers passed near the trail, and somewhere near the rose garden, an elderly man sat silently on a wooden bench, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand, and a weathered paperback resting in his lap. His name was Walter Jennings, 73 years old, retired math teacher, and a grandfather of 5. He wore his usual attire, khaki slacks, a light gray cardigan, and a faded navy cap stitched with the words Tuskegee University Alumni. His skin, the deep brown of polished mahogany, bore the creases of 1,000 smiles and the quiet sorrow of hard-earned wisdom. He had been coming to this park every Tuesday and Thursday morning for the past 6 years, ever since his wife Clara passed. The routine gave him something to anchor to. Sit at the same bench, sip from his thermos of peppermint tea, feed the squirrels with leftover sandwich crusts, and people watch until the breeze whispered it was time to go. But today would break that rhythm in a way he could never have expected. Walter's attention was focused on a small boy trying to kick a soccer ball that kept rolling under a nearby bench. The boy giggled with each miss, and Walter smiled softly. Just then, the sharp crackle of a police radio pierced the tranquility. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stand up." A stern voice cut through the calm. Walter turned his head slowly to see a young white police officer, mid-30s, sunglasses perched too confidently on his nose, a rigid hand resting on the butt of his belt. "Excuse me," Walter asked, his voice steady but surprised. "You can't sit here," the officer said flatly, glancing at his clipboard. "We've received complaints about a suspicious individual loitering in the area. Description matches you." Walter blinked. "I'm just sitting." "Same as I've done every week for the last few years." The officer's tone sharpened. "Do you have identification?" Walter frowned but reached slowly for his wallet. "Is this really necessary, son?" "It's Officer Daly, and yes, it is," the man replied, taking the ID and eyeing it with a barely disguised skepticism. Walter said nothing. The rustle of leaves overhead was the only sound for a long moment. Daly handed the ID back. "All right, Mr. Jennings, but I still need you to vacate the area." Walter exhaled, the weight of decades of microaggression sitting heavy on his shoulders. "I'm not causing a disturbance. I'm sitting on a public bench in a public park." The officer's hand twitched. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." "I don't want to escalate." "Then don't," Walter said, locking eyes with the man. Across the path, a young woman in yoga pants and a ponytail had stopped to watch. A man on a nearby bench took out his phone. The tension had drawn attention. "Is there a problem, officer?" the man with the phone called out. Daly's jaw tightened. "Stay out of this." But Walter had already stood up, slowly, deliberately. "It's fine. I'll leave." He gathered his book and thermos, nodding at the growing circle of watchers. As he walked away, a small girl, no older than 7, ran up to him with a daisy crown in her hand. "Mister, you forgot your hat," she said sweetly, reaching up. Walter crouched slowly, meeting her gaze. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said, gently placing the hat back on his head. The moment was simple. And yet something about it cracked the silence of the crowd. The father of the girl, a broad-shouldered black man in his 40s, stepped forward, his face stern. "What's going on here?" he asked, eyes fixed on Officer Daly. "Just doing my job," Daly replied, his voice clipped. "Looks more like harassment," the man shot back. More phones were out now, recording. Daly scanned the crowd, visibly growing uncomfortable. "Sir, if you could just move along." Walter turned. "No need," he said, now walking past the officer with quiet dignity. "I've got somewhere more welcoming to be." He didn't look back, but the murmur behind him had begun to shift, a current of questions, concerns, quiet outrage. Later that evening, the clip made its way onto a neighborhood Facebook group. Then Twitter. The headline read, "Black Grandpa Kicked Out of Park While Eating Lunch, No Law Broken." By nightfall, it had gone viral. But Walter, at that moment, sat in his small kitchen apartment on Boston's South Side, his tea warming his hands again. The news was spreading, but he had no idea. He simply turned the page of his book and read, unaware that the world outside was starting to pay attention, and that the name Walter Jennings would soon mean something very different. Walter didn't check social media. He didn't even own a smartphone. His flip phone, a model he'd had for over a decade, sat on the kitchen counter ringing loudly and unanswered as he dozed in his armchair with a blanket over his knees and a blues record humming softly in the background. But the world outside was moving quickly. By the next morning, the clip from Marlow Park had crossed 1 million views. News anchors debated it, Twitter threads dissected it, and think pieces emerged before Walter even had a chance to hear the phrase racial profiling in connection with his name. Meanwhile, in the cramped office of the Boston Police Department's 14th Precinct, Officer Daly paced back and forth, his normally smug expression replaced by an unmistakable grimace. Captain Lisa Conway leaned against her desk, arms folded tightly, eyes locked on her subordinate. "So, you're telling me," she said slowly, "that you removed a 73-year-old man from a public bench in a public park for, what, matching a vague description?" Daly cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I received a complaint from a resident about a suspicious individual." "Who was doing what?" Daly hesitated. "Loitering, watching kids eating on a bench." "Alone." Lisa sighed and reached for a printed statement. "Walter Jennings, retired educator. No record, no citations, served in Vietnam. Commendations from the city for decades of community work. This man is a respected elder, not a threat." Daly's jaw twitched. "Ma'am, in the moment, I acted on instinct." He seemed off. "Off," she repeated. "You mean black?" "That's not what I said." "It's what everyone heard," she said flatly, tossing the report on the desk. Outside the precinct, cameras had already begun gathering. Local activists, community organizers, and journalists stood in clusters demanding answers. The footage had tapped into something deep, something raw. Walter's quiet dignity, the way he de-escalated while being disrespected, had struck a nerve with people exhausted by similar stories. Meanwhile, in his apartment, Walter finally picked up the phone. "Grandpa," his eldest granddaughter Maya said breathlessly, "you're on the news." Walter rubbed his temple. "What are you talking about, baby?" "There's a video." "From the park, of the cop asking you to leave. It's everywhere." "People are furious." Walter blinked. "Why would anyone care? I didn't even raise my voice." "That's exactly why," Maya said. "You were calm. They weren't. You didn't deserve any of that." There was silence on the line. Then Walter exhaled slowly. "I've seen worse," he said. "That doesn't make it right," Maya replied. "You always taught us to stand up for what's right. Maybe now it's your turn." Walter chuckled softly. "I'm too old for revolutions, girl." "You don't have to start one," Maya said. "But you might already be in one." A few hours later, Walter agreed, reluctantly, to meet with a community leader named Asha Monroe. She showed up at his building wearing jeans, sneakers, and a worn Harvard sweatshirt. In her early 30s, she had the sharp clarity of someone used to fighting uphill battles and making people uncomfortable in power. "Mr. Jennings," she said as they shook hands in his kitchen. "I run a group called Citizens for Public Justice. We believe your story could help bring real change to how our parks and streets are policed." Walter poured tea for both of them. "I didn't do anything." "You didn't need to," Asha said. "What happened to you is what happens to so many others, but they don't always get it on video or live to talk about it." "You're calm, you're respected, and most importantly, you have nothing to hide. People are listening." He shook his head. "And what do you want me to do? Shout into a microphone? March down City Hall?" "We'll handle the shouting," she said, smiling. "What we need from you is presence." "Maybe a statement. Maybe a meeting with the mayor's office. The more you speak, the harder it is for them to sweep this under the rug." Walter didn't answer right away. He stared at the photo frame on the counter, his late wife Clara holding their firstborn grandchild, both laughing like they shared some secret joke. "Let me sleep on it," he said finally. That night, he couldn't sleep. He thought about the young girl with the daisy crown, about Officer Daly's clenched jaw and twitchy fingers, and about the cold pressure in his chest when he realized how easily things could have gone differently. The next morning, he walked to Marlow Park. There were more people than usual. Reporters, yes, but also neighbors, church members, strangers with signs that read, "We see you, Walter, and our parks, our rights." Someone offered him a microphone. He didn't take it. Instead, he sat on his bench, opened his book, and read. And still, the cameras rolled. The photos spread, a quiet protest, simple and defiant. No words. Just presence. The world had seen the injustice, but now they were witnessing something rarer. Grace. And the ripple was only beginning. By the third day, the mayor's office could no longer ignore the pressure. A clip of Walter Jennings being removed from the park had made its way to national networks. CNN ran a segment titled, "Another Day, Another Disrespect," and a prominent talk show host dedicated an entire monologue to the incident, calling it a prime example of why dignity and skin color still aren't allowed to coexist in public space. The mayor, Douglas Greer, a seasoned politician with a record of calculated neutrality, found himself backed into a corner. He called an emergency press briefing to announce the formation of a community review task force and extended a personal invitation to Walter Jennings to meet with city officials. But Walter wasn't in a hurry to play politics. Instead, he spent that morning walking through his old neighborhood in Roxbury. Everywhere he went, someone stopped him. A teenager with his earbuds in offered a high five. A middle-aged woman in scrubs thanked him for sitting down so the rest of us could stand up. Even the barista at the corner coffee shop insisted on giving him his drink for free. Still, Walter felt out of place in the whirlwind. He had always been a private man. His strength came not from the spotlight, but from steady presence, the kind of man who showed up early, stayed late, and rarely raised his voice unless it was to cheer on his grandkids' soccer games. That afternoon, as he sat by the window of his apartment overlooking the street below, Maya arrived again, this time with a young man by her side. "Grandpa," she said, "this is Jordan Hill. He's an investigative journalist. He works with the Sentinel." Walter eyed the young man cautiously. "You all trying to turn me into some kind of celebrity?" "No, sir," Jordan said quickly. "Just someone whose story matters." Walter gestured for them to sit. "Well, I'll tell you what matters. Making sure no other old man is made to feel like a criminal for watching birds and reading books in a public park." Jordan leaned forward. "Exactly. That's why I'm digging into Officer Daly's record, and something interesting came up." Walter's brow rose. "Your incident wasn't the first," Jordan said. "There have been 3 other complaints filed against Daly over the past 2 years, all by Black or Latino residents, all dismissed by internal review." Maya crossed her arms. And now people are finally watching. Jordan nodded. I've got sources inside the precinct. There's pressure on the captain to protect Daly. Apparently, he's related to someone high up. Walter exhaled deeply, his face unreadable. Why does it take a viral video? He muttered. For people to see what we've been saying for decades. Jordan's voice softened. Because stories like yours, Mr. Jennings, they're hard to ignore, especially when the victim looks like someone's grandfather. That night, Walter finally agreed to speak at a community forum hosted at St. Luke's Church, a small but historic spot in the heart of the neighborhood. Word traveled fast, and the modest hall was soon overflowing. Folding chairs scraped against hardwood floors. Camera crews set up quietly in the back. There were pastors, activists, neighbors, and, to Walter's surprise, several off-duty police officers seated in the rear, faces tight with something between discomfort and curiosity. Maya sat beside him as he waited for his turn to speak. She leaned in, whispering, "You don't have to be perfect, Grandpa. Just be you." When he took the podium, the murmurs quieted. Walter stood still for a moment, his eyes sweeping across the room. I've lived in this city for over 50 years, he began. I've taught in its schools, paid its taxes, buried friends in its cemeteries. I've walked through its parks, sat on its benches, and held my grandchildren in my arms while watching the seasons change. But last week, I was made to feel like none of that mattered. Like I didn't belong. Like I was invisible. He paused, letting the words settle. Now, I didn't come here tonight to demand revenge. I'm not here to shame anyone or stir up hate, but I will say this. Silence never fixed a damn thing. There were soft nods and a few quiet amens from the back. I've seen real injustice in my life, he continued. I marched in '68. I taught kids who didn't have enough to eat. I watched young men get swallowed by streets that didn't love them back. But never, not once, did I think I'd live to see a day where sitting on a bench with a book made me a suspect. He looked over at the officers in the back. We don't want special treatment. We want equal treatment. We want the same right to rest without suspicion, to walk without fear, to live without being profiled. Applause erupted, this time louder, rising to fill the church ceiling like a prayer. One of the officers in the back looked away, his jaw clenched. As the evening ended, Asha approached with a small smile. I think you just started something, she said. I didn't start anything, Walter replied, gathering his coat. I just stopped pretending it wasn't happening. But what Walter didn't know was that Officer Daly had been watching the live stream from his apartment, a half-empty beer bottle in one hand, the remote clenched in the other. And for the first time in years he felt like he wasn't in control. Not of the narrative, not of his image, not of the tide that was now turning against him. And it was only just beginning. By the following Monday, Walter Jennings's name was everywhere, on morning talk shows, in op-eds, and across social media feeds. Grandpa Justice, some headlines called him. Others dubbed him the Bench Prophet. What began as a moment of discrimination had exploded into a national conversation about age, race, and dignity. But not everyone was celebrating. Officer Daniel Daly sat in a cramped back room of the 16th Precinct, arms folded across his chest, watching as Captain Michelle Langford laid a thick file on the table in front of him. You see this? She said, tapping the folder. These are complaints filed against you in the past 2 years. One by a young black teenager you stopped outside his own apartment. One by a Latino father at the grocery store. And now this, Walter Jennings. Daly scoffed. You've known about those for months. Now just because some grandpa got famous on the internet, suddenly they matter? Langford's voice dropped. They always mattered. You just had the benefit of a system that looked the other way. Daly leaned forward. You think I'm racist? That's what this is about now? I was doing my job. Jennings didn't have ID. He looked suspicious. Langford narrowed her eyes. He was sitting. Reading, wearing a veteran's cap. Daly's jaw tensed. You weren't there. You don't know what I saw. She stood up, voice cool but firm. You're being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Daly's face flushed. You're letting the media dictate discipline now? No, she said, gathering her files. I'm letting the truth do that. Meanwhile, across town, Walter sat in a quiet cafe with Maya and Jordan Hill. A laptop sat open between them, displaying a draft of Jordan's new article, The Hidden History of Officer Daly. Walter sipped his coffee slowly. You're sure about publishing this? Jordan nodded. I triple-checked everything. Daly's uncle is a city councilman. That's how so many of his complaints disappeared. Internal reviews swept under the rug. Maya leaned in. This isn't just about you anymore, Grandpa. Daly's part of something bigger. Walter exhaled. I never wanted this kind of fight. But you've got it, Jordan said gently. And people are watching. You've become a symbol of something they've ignored for too long. Walter looked out the window, lost in thought. I was a history teacher for 30 years. I taught kids about the system, the Constitution, justice. But I never imagined I'd be the one holding the system accountable. Later that day, Walter received an unexpected visitor, Reverend Carlton Bennett, a respected civil rights leader who had marched with Dr. King and advised presidents. I watched your church forum, the Reverend said, easing into Walter's living room chair. Your words moved me. They reminded me of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Walter chuckled. Hope from an old man with a bad hip and a library card. Reverend Bennett smiled. Hope from someone who refused to be quiet. You don't know how many people you've inspired. And I want to help you take this further. Walter blinked. Further how? We're organizing a citywide Sit for Justice campaign. Seniors across Boston, and maybe even other cities, sitting peacefully in public spaces. Reading, talking, existing. A non-violent statement of presence. Walter was stunned. You think people will actually do that? They already are, the Reverend said, handing over a phone with video after video of elderly citizens on park benches, sidewalks, bus stops, holding signs that read, I belong here and I am Walter. As the movement grew, Officer Daly's world shrank. A formal hearing was scheduled. His union lawyer advised him to keep quiet. His fellow officers had begun avoiding him, unsure whether defending him would risk their own careers. But Daly had one last card to play. Late that night, he called a local conservative talk radio host and offered an exclusive interview. The next morning, his voice boomed across the airwaves. This whole thing has been twisted, he insisted. I was just doing my job. Now I'm the villain because the guy I questioned turned out to be some beloved grandpa? The host fed him softball questions, fanning the flames. But there are rumors, the host added, that this Jennings guy isn't just some retired teacher, that there's more to him. Have you heard anything? Daly hesitated, then leaned into the bait. Let's just say I have sources who think he's not as innocent as he seems. The story exploded again, but this time it took a different tone. Fringe blogs picked up the narrative, questioning Walter's background. Was he really a veteran? Had he staged the whole thing for attention? That night, Maya stormed into Walter's apartment. You see what they're saying about you online? She fumed. They're digging up old yearbooks, claiming you weren't even at the school you taught at. It's disgusting. Walter remained calm. Let them talk. No, Maya shouted. They're trying to discredit you. To tear down everything you've built. Walter stood, moving to his bookshelf. He pulled out a photo album, yellowed pages, crisp black and white images. Himself in uniform. His retirement ceremony, letters from students, commendations. They can dig all they want, he said, but the truth's already been lived, and it's right here. As the smear campaign intensified, something unexpected happened. Former students began posting their own stories. Mr. Jennings helped me apply to college when no one else believed in me. He stayed after school every Friday to tutor my brother. He taught us not just history, but how to stand up for ourselves. Within hours, the hashtag #MyWalterStory trended nationwide. The tide turned again, and this time, it wasn't just Walter speaking, it was a chorus. And their voices were too loud to ignore. The day after the community forum at St. Luke's Church, Walter Jennings sat alone at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of peppermint tea that had gone cold an hour earlier. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting faint lines across the wooden floor. Around him were unopened letters, some handwritten, some typed. A few were thank you notes. Others were from local groups inviting him to speak. One was from a national TV producer asking for an exclusive interview. He hadn't answered any of them. He wasn't looking for attention. He was just trying to breathe. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Maya stepped in, winded and excited. "You're not gonna believe this," she said, waving her phone. "City Council just voted to open an investigation into Officer Braxton. And guess what? Your story is trending. Nationally." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Trending? That's a good thing now?" "It is when it forces them to listen," Maya replied. But Walter didn't smile. He sat back, fingers interlocked, expression thoughtful. Public anger has short legs. It runs fast at first, then loses breath. Maybe. "But not if we keep moving," Maya said. Just then, the door opened again. This time, Evelyn Brooks walked in, sharp in a navy suit, her phone still in hand. She was one of Boston's most respected civil rights attorneys and an old friend of Clara, Walter's late wife. She greeted Walter with a soft nod before diving right in. "Walter, there's a shift coming," she said, setting her phone down. "I've got word someone in the mayor's office is trying to spin this. They're floating the idea that you were non-compliant when Officer Braxton approached." Walter's eyes narrowed. Non-compliant? I was reading a book. They know that. But politics don't care about facts. They care about controlling the story. Maya asked, "So what do we do?" Walter exhaled deeply. "We do what I've always told my students. Bring the receipts." That afternoon, they met at the neighborhood library with a growing team of allies. Local shop owners, retired educators, former students, and even 2 younger city workers who had quietly offered support. Among them was Jaden, a tech-savvy college senior who had volunteered to dig through security footage. He projected clips on the wall of the library's meeting room. "This one's from a florist across the street," Jaden explained. "It shows Mr. Jennings arriving, calm. Just sits on the bench and pulls out his book." Another clip showed Officer Braxton approaching, posture stiff, hand already at his belt. "Here." Jaden paused. "Watch how Braxton hovers. No greeting, no casual approach, just intimidation." Walter watched in silence. His own face on the screen looked older than he felt. But the scene was clear and damning. Still, the real shock came that evening. Maya's phone buzzed with a message from a blocked number. The voice on the line was low, careful. "You don't know me, but I worked in the mayor's office. I saw the internal reports. Braxton's had 3 complaints in 2 years, all from elderly Black or Latino men, all dismissed without proper review. I've got copies. Why are you telling me this? Maya asked. Because I saw what Walter did, and because it's time someone told the truth. The files arrived via encrypted email the next morning. Maya printed them out. Evelyn read them line by line, each one confirming what they feared. Braxton had a pattern: profiling, intimidation, and institutional cover-up. And each time the complaints were buried by the same assistant director, whose brother happened to be Braxton's uncle. "This is the crack in the dam," Evelyn said. "If we release this, the story becomes bigger than one officer. It becomes about the system that protects him." Walter looked down at the pages. "Good. Let it be." 2 days later, a town hall was scheduled. Though it wasn't an official hearing, the city knew the cameras would be rolling and the people would be watching. The mayor didn't attend, but several council members did. The auditorium filled fast. Older veterans, young activists, and residents tired of being quiet. Reporters lined the back wall. Walter wore a dark brown suit that had once belonged to his son, polished shoes, and that same Tuskegee cap. Maya walked beside him. "You don't have to carry this alone." "I'm not," Walter said. "Not anymore." When his name was called, the room quieted. "I came here today not to argue or accuse," he began, voice steady, "but to remind you all that dignity is not something you earn through credentials or compliance. It's your right the day you're born." He held up a still photo from the footage, him sitting quietly with a book in hand. This was the threat. Then he held up another, Braxton's hand reaching aggressively toward him. And this was the response. The room stirred. "We always say, never again. We say we've learned. But what good is learning if we forget it the moment we feel uncomfortable?" From the front row, Evelyn rose. "I move that the council suspend Officer Braxton pending full review." The motion was seconded by Councilman Whitman, an unexpected voice of support. "It's not about politics," he said. "It's about principle." The vote passed unanimously. As Walter stepped outside, a cheer erupted. But it wasn't the noise that moved him. It was the sight of Malik, standing near the bench where it had all started, holding a cardboard sign that simply read, "I am Walter." Walter smiled gently. "Now that," he whispered to Maya, "is something worth trending for." And across the street, inside a dark SUV, a man whispered into a phone. "He's more dangerous than we thought. We've got a problem." But Walter Jennings didn't care who was watching anymore, because the truth had finally stood up. And it looked a lot like him. The morning after the town hall vote, Walter Jennings sat at his kitchen table, quietly sipping a fresh cup of peppermint tea. The Boston Globe lay folded on the table, the headline impossible to miss. "Council suspends officer amid park incident fallout." Underneath was a photo of Walter standing at the podium, his hand raised slightly, mid-speech. The image captured his quiet defiance, but Walter's face as he stared at it now held no triumph. Just thought. His old phone buzzed for the 5th time in 20 minutes. He ignored it. What mattered today wasn't the press, or the headlines, or the interviews people wanted. What mattered was the impact. Would anything really change? Across town, Officer Daniel Braxton sat in a sterile conference room at precinct headquarters. His uniform was replaced by a wrinkled button-up and slacks. Seated across from him were 2 internal affairs officers, their expressions flat. Lieutenant Hayworth glanced at a printed file. "Officer Braxton, are you aware that we now have additional footage from the April 19th incident?" Braxton leaned forward. "It doesn't change the facts." He wasn't compliant. Hayworth didn't blink. The footage shows Mr. Jennings was seated, calm, reading. You approached with your hand already near your belt. You failed to issue a standard warning. You raised your voice first. Braxton clenched his jaw. That man gave me attitude. He's a 73-year-old retired teacher, Hayworth replied coldly. A veteran, no threat. You escalated, and now this department is in national headlines. Braxton stared at the wall, refusing to speak further. But inside, his mind raced. He felt like the world was turning on him. Like he was the victim. And worst of all, Jennings was being painted as a saint. Back in Roxbury, Walter finally picked up a call. It wasn't a journalist. It was Malik, the same boy who had seen the incident and reached out after the hearing. Mr. Jennings? Malik's voice was soft, hesitant. I just wanted to say thank you for standing your ground. For not yelling. You didn't act like they expect us to act. You showed them something different. Walter smiled faintly. That means a lot, son. You keep watching. Keep asking questions. That's how change sticks. Malik's voice lit up. My mom says you're a real hero. I'm just a tired man who got pushed too far, Walter said gently. That same afternoon, Maya met Walter at the Boston Herald offices. Her face was tense, papers in hand. There's something we didn't expect, she said. Braxton's lawyer just hinted to the press that you have a political history. They're trying to paint you as a provocateur. As if you staged the whole thing. Walter sighed. Of course they are. When they can't disprove your truth, they attack your character. We need to fight back, Maya said. We need to control the narrative. Walter shook his head. No, we just keep telling the truth. That's enough. Later that day, Evelyn joined them at Walter's apartment. She laid a new set of documents on the coffee table, Braxton's internal record. We've verified it now, she said. Braxton had prior complaints from 3 different civilians, all elderly men of color. 2 of them were quietly dismissed. 1 was marked inconclusive despite clear evidence. Walter looked through the papers. This didn't start with me. No, but it can end with you, Evelyn said. The 3 of them sat in silence for a moment before the doorbell rang. Reverend Bennett entered, his fedora in hand. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said. Not at all, Walter replied. What brings you? I came to ask a favor, the Reverend said. We're launching a statewide Sit for Justice campaign. Peaceful presence. Public spaces, elder voices. We want you to be the face. Walter's eyes widened. You sure you want the face to be mine? I'm no politician. That's why, the Reverend replied. You're real? You didn't ask for this, but you stood in it. People follow that. Walter looked at Maya and Evelyn. What do you 2 think? I think it's the right fight, Maya said. And you're not in it alone. Evelyn nodded. We'll handle the press. You handle the people. As Walter agreed, the campaign took shape. Flyers went out. Social media buzzed. Pictures of seniors reading on park benches spread across Boston. Signs read, I am Walter, we sit for dignity, and no bench is illegal. Meanwhile, Braxton was unraveling. His appeal for reinstatement had been denied. His union lawyer warned him to stay quiet, but Braxton couldn't let it go. Late one night, he called a fringe podcast known for its inflammatory takes. I'm telling you, there's more to this Jennings guy, Braxton said on air. He's not just some teacher. Look deeper. He's tied to old protests, radical stuff. The host, hungry for controversy, pushed it further. Are you saying this was a setup? I'm saying it's convenient. Cameras show up, stories leak, and now he's a hero? Doesn't feel right. The next morning, the damage was done. Blogs ran wild headlines. Is Walter Jennings hiding something? Activist grandpa or political pawn? Maya stormed into Walter's apartment holding her phone. You see what they're saying about you? Walter didn't even flinch. They're scared. That's why they're reaching. We have to respond. Walter stood, walked to his bookshelf, and pulled out an old photo album. He flipped through it slowly. Classroom photos, letters from students, his teaching award, Clara's memorial program, and an image of him in a dusty military uniform standing beside a chalkboard. They want to question my life. Let them. But this right here, that's who I am. Later that night, Kermai Walter story began trending. Former students, neighbors, and even fellow veterans shared their stories. One wrote, Mr. Jennings stayed after school every Wednesday to help me pass algebra. Another said, he used to bring food for kids who didn't have lunch. The narrative flipped again. Walter didn't have to defend himself. The community did it for him. And Braxton? He watched from his apartment window as the world moved without him, his name now associated not with order, but with failure. What began with a bench was now a movement, and Walter Jennings wasn't just a symbol, he was a storm. The day of the city council hearing dawned gray and misty, the sky draped in a thick fog that seemed to muffle the sounds of the waking city. Walter Jennings stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of his crisp white shirt. His suit, a dark navy he hadn't worn since Clara's funeral, fit a bit tighter now, but he wore it with purpose. He took one final look at his reflection, then nodded to himself, quietly resolute. Outside Boston City Hall, a crowd had already begun to form. Activists, veterans, students, clergy, even parents with strollers stood shoulder to shoulder in the damp chill, holding signs that read, "We sit for justice," and "Walter Jennings is all of us." Reporters milled around, microphones ready, eyes scanning for the man at the center of it all. Walter arrived with Maya by his side, flanked also by Evelyn and Reverend Bennett. He said little, but his presence was enough. Cameras clicked as he walked slowly up the steps, deliberate, calm, every stride a rebuttal to the story that had been twisted about him. Inside the chamber, the hearing was already in session. Officer Daniel Braxton sat at a table with his union attorney, his face locked in a scowl that masked growing fear. He hadn't expected the public turnout. He hadn't expected the silent stares of city officials who once nodded to him in hallways. The tide had shifted, and he could feel it. Councilmember Elena Torres tapped her gavel lightly. We are here today to review the incident at Marlowe Park involving Mr. Walter Jennings and Officer Daniel Braxton. Mr. Jennings, you may begin. Walter rose, walking to the podium with quiet confidence. He adjusted the microphone and looked out at the rows of people, their eyes wide, their bodies leaning forward. My name is Walter Jennings. I'm a retired math teacher, a father, a grandfather, and a widower. I served my country, I served my students. And on April 19th, I sat on a bench to feed squirrels and read a book. The room held its breath. For that, I was approached, interrogated, and removed from a public park by an officer who saw not a man, not a citizen, but a threat. He paused, letting the silence amplify his words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't resist. I simply asked why. And for that, I was treated like I didn't belong. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Walter continued, I'm not here for sympathy. I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here because this isn't just about me. This is about what happens when those with power forget their duty to protect and instead use it to intimidate. Councilmember Torres nodded slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Jennings." Before she could proceed, one of the legal aides stepped forward with a USB drive, whispering in her ear. Her eyes flicked up in surprise. "We've received new footage submitted anonymously this morning," Torres announced. "This angle was not part of the initial investigation." A projector flicked on, casting an image across the chamber wall. The video showed a different angle of the encounter, filmed from behind a nearby hedge, likely by a jogger. It caught Officer Braxton approaching with his hand already on his belt, voice clipped before Walter had even spoken. But what truly stunned the room was the audio. Clearer than any footage before, it picked up Braxton muttering as Walter walked away. "I don't care if he's a damn veteran. He don't belong here." Gasps filled the room. Braxton's attorney stood instantly. "That video is unverified." But Councilmember Torres cut him off. "It matches the original body cam audio. And it paints a very different picture from the one Officer Braxton gave in his report." Braxton's composure cracked. He stood, red-faced. This is a setup. He knew what he was doing. Playing the victim. Getting everyone worked up over nothing. Walter turned slowly, not angry, but firm. "I didn't play anything. I lived it. The only thing I did was exist." "And you treated that like a crime." Councilmember Darnell Green, a former civil rights attorney, leaned forward. "Officer Braxton, would you like to revise your previous statement?" Braxton opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Councilmember Torres stood. "Based on this new evidence and the department's failure to properly disclose key information, I move that Officer Braxton be formally suspended pending final review and that a full audit of internal disciplinary protocols be launched." "I second," Green said. The vote passed unanimously. As the gavel dropped, the room erupted into applause, not for punishment, but for long overdue recognition of truth. Outside the hearing chamber, Maya grabbed Walter's hand. "You did it, Grandpa. You showed them." Walter exhaled deeply. "No, baby. We all did." As they exited into the sunlight, a reporter asked, "Mr. Jennings, any final thoughts for the public?" Walter stopped, turned, and said simply, "Respect doesn't come from a badge. It comes from how you treat people. And every park bench in this country ought to be safe for anyone who needs a place to rest." Across town, Braxton sat alone in the precinct locker room, watching the video on his phone again. Over and over. Every time his words echoed louder. "He don't belong here." And now he finally understood what the rest of the world had always known. It wasn't Walter Jennings who didn't belong. It was him. The following week, the city council chamber was packed once again. This time, the vote wasn't about speculation or investigation. It was final. Officer Daniel Braxton was officially terminated from the Boston Police Department. The review board's findings were clear. Excessive force, misconduct, failure to report full evidence, and a pattern of bias substantiated by multiple complaints. Walter Jennings sat quietly in the third row, his hands folded in his lap, wearing the same Tuskegee cap that had become symbolic now. More than just a memento, it was a statement. His name no longer sat beneath headlines of humiliation. It now appeared beside words like reform, courage, and catalyst. As the ruling was read aloud, a hush fell over the chamber. Councilmember Torres concluded, "Today we make it clear that dignity and justice are not optional in this city. They are required." When the gavel struck, the room erupted, not just in applause, but in relief. This time, the system had chosen accountability. Outside, sunlight broke through clouds that had lingered all morning. A crowd had gathered again. Journalists, community leaders, families, and strangers who had followed Walter's journey like a thread of their own untold stories. Walter stepped to the microphone slowly, Maya beside him, her hand on his arm. He took a breath before speaking. "This isn't victory," he said quietly. "This is a beginning, because while I had cameras to protect me, too many others don't. I had a granddaughter who wouldn't back down. But what about those without a Maya, without a voice? Without the strength or the energy to fight?" He paused, letting the question settle like dust on pavement. This city owes them more than one headline. It owes them change. And I plan to be part of making sure that change sticks. He turned and walked away. No grand finale, no dramatic pause, just the steady steps of a man who knew his place in the world again. Later that afternoon, Walter returned to Marlow Park, not to make a statement, but because it was Tuesday. His bench was there, the same one. And so was Malik, the teenage sketch artist, waiting with a sketchbook in his lap. "I saved your seat," Malik grinned. Walter chuckled. "You think this bench is mine now?" "No," the boy said. "I think it always was." They sat in silence for a while, watching a toddler chase bubbles across the lawn, a couple feeding ducks near the pond. For the first time in weeks, the world didn't feel so loud. "People keep asking me what I plan to do next," Walter finally said. "But honestly, I just want to read my book and sip my tea in peace." "Yeah," Malik nodded. "But they need you now. Maybe not with signs, but with what you've got up here." He tapped his own temple. "And in here," he tapped his heart. That evening, Maya brought over a folder from the mayor's office. "They want you on the new Civilian Oversight Board," she said, placing it on the table. "You'd lead it, not just as a figurehead, but as policy advisor. Real teeth." Walter flipped through the pages slowly. A list of names, a structure, a mission. One detail caught his eye. 2 of the seats were reserved for youth representatives. He smiled. "Tell them I'll do it, but I want Malik at that table." Maya beamed. "I already submitted his name." The next day, the Boston Herald ran a cover story titled, "The Bench That Sparked a Movement." A photo captured Walter seated beneath the park's willow tree, Malik next to him, sketching away. But the movement wasn't just in headlines. In parks across the country, older black men took to public benches, some holding books, others holding signs. "I am Walter. I belong here." Sit-ins returned, not to lunch counters, but to libraries, public transit stops, courthouse lawns. In New Orleans, a retired postal worker was offered a key to the city after refusing to leave a bus stop when questioned. In Chicago, a group of black veterans launched a mentorship program called The Front Porch, inspired by Walter's story, connecting young people with elders through storytelling. At a speaking engagement weeks later, Walter closed with one line that would be quoted for years. "They tried to erase me with a park bench. I answered with a seat at the table." The crowd stood, not because of what he endured, but because of what he transformed. This story wasn't just about a wrongful encounter. It was about legacy. It was about refusing to disappear when the world tells you to shrink. It was about using silence as strategy and voice as power. And if this story moved you, if Walter Jennings reminded you of your father, your teacher, your neighbor, then pass it on. Because justice only grows louder when we refuse to sit quietly. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in stories that hold power to speak for the voiceless. Share this with someone who still thinks one voice doesn't matter. Walter Jennings is proof that it does.